Hey guys, this is going to be a pretty quick video where we're looking at multiplying and dividing real numbers. Again, we're still in that pre-algebra review stuff, so this shouldn't take long. Go ahead and pause and write down these rules real quick for multiplying and dividing real numbers. They are very, very simple rules. First rule, same signs give a positive product or quotient. Different signs give a negative product or quotient. So this isn't anything that's new to you. You should have learned this probably in 6th grade would be my guess. So yesterday I talked about these words of wisdom. Today is just, I thought I'd reveal a little bit more about myself. So when I have salads, they tend to look more like that. There's green in there, right? So that's a good, healthy looking salad. All right, so here we're going to apply these rules. So here I have a positive number times a negative number. So we multiply this, and 12 times 8 is 84. But because it's positive times negative, the signs are different. I'm going to keep that same sign. Whoops, check that. That is not 84. It's still negative. It is negative 96. My fault. So moving right along here, I have a positive times a positive. 24 times 0.5 is positive 12. Down here, remember when you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across, but I have a negative times a positive, so that product's going to be negative. 3 times 1 is 3, and 4 times 2 is 8. And then here, if you recall what exponents mean, this means negative 3 times negative 3, or negative 3 has a factor 2 times, which is a negative times a negative, which equals positive 9. So none of this should be new to you at all. This is just a real quick review for you. So here, simplifying square root expressions. Now before I jump into these problems, there's a couple things I want to talk about. We'll talk more about this symbol later on in the year. But there's some things that you really need to think about here. First of all is signs in front of it. So you're going to see this come up in 3 different ways. You'll see it like this. We'll just say for x. You'll see with nothing in front of it. You'll see with a negative in front of it. And then you'll see this kind of weird plus minus combo, which means the positive or negative. And I'll talk about what those things mean here in a moment, but let's go ahead and look at this first. So here I have 25, the square root of 25, and then I want the negative of whatever that is, or the opposite of whatever that is. So in this case it would be negative 5. And then this one right here, we'll learn again about these rules a little bit later, but this is called a radical sign. This radical sign, actually, I don't know what the technical word for it is, but it kind of distributes to both the top and the bottom here so that I get radical 4 over radical 49, and that's still that plus minus here. So here I have some values that I can simplify. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 49 is 7. And whatever the sign is in front of the radical is the sign that you keep. So in this case, it's plus minus. Now you may be asking yourself, well, why on earth are we doing that? Well, if I'm coming back here and I'm looking at this 25 and the 5. 5 squared is the same thing as 5 times 5, which equals 25. Right? So here I'm looking at a positive 5. And that positive 5 squared equals 25. But if I take that negative 5 and I square it, then what I end up having, because of those multiplication rules, I get a negative times a negative, which equals a positive. So here I have different number being squared, yet I'm getting the same product. Okay, so because of that, depending on the problem or the situation, you may be more interested in the negative square root, or you want to include both the positive and the negative square root, depending on the problem. So oftentimes you'll see these signs in front of it letting you know. If you see one that looks like this, if it was just the square root of 36, then in that case, just the positive square root is acceptable. All right, it's just looking what is the positive square root, although you should assume that there are 2 square roots to that because negative 6 squared would also equal that 36. All right, so here's a couple for you to try. Pause and give these a shot. Hopefully you found this first one to be 8. This next one is positive and negative 4, and you must have this symbol in front of it. If not, that is incorrect. And then this one is negative 1/6, and it must be negative because, again, the sign that's in front of that radical sign is what needs to go in front of the square root. All right, here, so you want to copy this down. The inverse property of multiplication says for every non-zero number, a, there is a multiplicative inverse 1 over a, such that those two numbers, when they multiply together, equals 1. So in just normal terms, any number there's another number out there you can multiply it by, and it will always equal 1. For example, negative 4 times negative 1/4 equals 1. And if you recall some of those fraction simplifying things that hopefully you learn, you guys maybe remember that these two things would simplify out, and I get a negative times a negative, which is a positive, so all I have here is 1s times 1s, and that just leaves me with that positive 1. That's called a multiplicative inverse. The reciprocal of a non-zero number of the form a over b is b over a. In other words, flip the fraction. Any number multiplied by its reciprocal has a product of 1. So a reciprocal is just another word for a multiplicative inverse. And hopefully that word sounds familiar to you when you're talking about dividing. So what is the value of x over y? Remember, a fraction bar means divide. What is the value of x divided by y when x is 3/4 and y is negative 2/3? So if I were to write this, I would have negative 3/4. If I write it exactly as the way it is here, it would look something like this. Now, it is a big no-no to leave fractions inside a fraction, but if you recall that this means division, then what this means is the same thing as negative 3/4 divided by negative 2/3. Now, when you're in 6th grade or even 5th grade and you're learning about this stuff, I taught 6th grade a long time ago, and when I did, I used to tell my students to do keep, switch, flip. All right, so when you divide with fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So when I say keep, switch, flip, it means keep the first number, switch division to multiplication, and then flip the second. And you end up getting a value or a problem that looks like this. All right, so this is where I'm multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay, multiplying by the reciprocal. And I get a negative times a negative, so it's going to be positive. 3 times 3 is 9 over 4 times 2 is 8. This is an improper fraction, and my preference for you is to leave your answers as an improper fraction. Unless it's something where you're dealing with cooking or something like that where it makes sense to change it to a mixed number. In most instances, it's okay to leave it as an improper fraction. Just make sure that it's simplified. So in this particular instance, 9/8 is perfectly fine. If you did change it to a mixed number, that's okay. I won't count you wrong. I'm just telling you that it's not necessary for the purposes of this class, unless it's a word problem where it makes sense. You wouldn't say if you're doing like a cooking problem, if you ended up with like 15/4 of an answer, you wouldn't say, I'm going to add 15/4 of flour. That wouldn't make any sense at all. You'd say like 3 3/4 cups of flour. So in this instance, you definitely want to change that. But in these other ones, they're not necessary. Is that right? Yeah. All right, let's keep going. All right, here's one for you to try. So take a moment and try that on your own. When you do this, remember it's keep the first number, switch to multiplication, and then flip the second. My preference is anytime there's a negative fraction, I put the negative by the numerator. You can put it in front. You could actually put it by the denominator too. The thing that's important is that you make sure that there's only one. For some reason, I see students do this a lot. When they see a negative fraction, they assume that this happens. And that is not true. That is a big no-no. And here's why. A negative over a negative becomes a positive, and you just change the entire value of that number. So make sure that you only have one negative here. All right, here, before I multiply, you could simplify before you multiply. So here, 6 and 4 are both divisible by 2. So change that to a 2, and change that to a 3. And I have 3 times negative 3 equals negative 9. And here I have 2 times 5 is 10, so negative 9/10. Hopefully you found that as your same answer. And that's it. So I'll see you guys in class.